flanker fighters sliced through the pre-dawn sky radar silent, hugging the terrain at barely 100 feet above ground level. Their destination, a hardened Russian air defense node nestled deep in the mountainous terrain near Zolotarivka, a town now transformed into a launch zone for Russia's S-300 PMU, two surface-to-air missile batteries. This wasn't just another radar post. It was one of the last fully operational SAM umbrellas protecting key supply routes into Luhansk and Severodonetsk. The weather favored the attackers. Light fog sat low in the valleys, reducing visual spotting, while a temperature inversion layer at 1,300 feet disrupted vertical radar returns. Ukrainian meteorologists had flagged this window days in advance. Timing had to be perfect. The Su-27 had just 6 minutes to pass undetected before the next Russian MiG-31BM patrol was scheduled to sweep the area. Down below, Russian units were entering a shift change. Night crews were handing over encrypted logs. Operators were distracted, and in those quiet transitional minutes, the kind where the human element fails, even the most advanced system, the trap was set. Unknown to the defenders, Ukraine's Air Force wasn't launching a probe. It was launching a precision decapitation strike. And by the time Russian sensors caught wind of the incoming jets, they would be blind, burning, or both. The skies over eastern Luhansk were no longer just contested. They were about to become a proving ground for how old aircraft, flown smart, could outthink billion-dollar defenses. The target wasn't just protected, it was fortified like a Cold War-era fortress brought into the 21st century. After repeated drone incursions and artillery strikes in previous months, the Russian military had transformed the Zolotarivka zone into a three-layered air defense trap, engineered to vaporize anything that flew within 25 miles. At the heart of it sat the S-300 PMU-2 favorite, Russia's medium to long-range SAM system capable of striking targets up to 120 miles away, and at altitudes exceeding 90,000 feet. These launchers were paired with the 92 N6E gravestone radar, hidden in a camouflaged clearing and connected via fiber-optic cables to remote control bunkers. Closer in, Panzer S-1 systems stood ready-mounted on all-terrain chassis, their 30mm autocannons and twin missile pods scanning for low-altitude threats. These short-range interceptors specialized in taking out cruise missiles, drones, or fighter jets flying nap of the Earth, exactly the kind of tactic Ukraine's Su-27 were now employing. And watching it all from above were Su-35S multi-role fighters and MiG-31BM interceptors, flying rotating CAPs, combat air patrols, at 30,000 feet. With their NO-35 Urbis-E and Zaslon-M radars, they could see targets far beyond the horizon at least, under normal circumstances. Layered on top of it all was continuous ECM coverage. Russian jammers in the 1.3 GHz range created a dome of distortion, disrupting GPS signals and throwing off missile guidance systems. The defenders believed they had sealed the sky, but that belief was built on predictability, predictable vectors, predictable signatures, predictable tactics. What they didn't anticipate was an attack that would weaponize the terrain, the timing, and even their own overconfidence. And as the Su-27 closed to within strike range, Russia's $500 billion network was about to learn a $5 lesson in asymmetry. To defeat a fortress, you don't knock on the front gate, you slip through the cracks, and Ukraine's Air Force knew exactly where those cracks were. Just minutes before dawn, two upgraded Su-27 flanker jets emerged from the mist-covered ravines west of Zolotarivka, flying less than 100 feet above the terrain lower than most helicopters dared to go. Their pilots had memorized the topography, rehearsed every turn and tree line, using the undulating hills as natural radar blind spots. At that altitude, the powerful Russian radars couldn't get a clean lock. The curvature of the Earth and the shadowing effect of the hills rendered them effectively invisible. Each flanker was outfitted with a Kibani-M electronic warfare pod, broadcasting spoofed radar signatures mimicking decoy aircraft at higher altitudes. These phantom echoes bounced across Russian screens, drawing the attention of Panzer units and S-300 operators away from the real threat gliding beneath them. Meanwhile, a pair of MiG-29 raced in from the northwest at 8,000 feet, emitting strong radar and IFF signals posing as the main strike package. Their job wasn't to survive, it was to distract. Russian defenses lit up in response, tracking the MiGs with targeting radars and preparing interceptors for launch. But the real danger was sliding under their nose. As the MiG-29 second turned sharply to break contact, the Su-27 second punched into the heart of the defense zone, just 15 miles from the radar hub, still undetected by any meaningful fire control system. It was a sleight of hand in the sky, a game of misdirection that only worked because Russia expected brute force, not finesse. And by the time they realized the real attack was beneath the fog line, it was too late to stop what came next. At 4:27 a.m., just seconds after slipping beneath the radar curtain, one of the Ukrainian Su-27 second lit up the sky with a fireball from its right-wing pylon. Two Kh-31P anti-radiation missiles launched in rapid succession, screaming toward the Russian Nebo-M radar array at nearly Mach 3. The Kh-31P wasn't just fast, it was designed to hunt. Its seeker head locked onto the Nebo's emissions like a bloodhound on scent, adjusting trajectory in real time. The radar crew had just seconds to respond, but in those seconds, the missiles had already covered over 15 miles. 4 seconds later, the Nebo-M's 3D phased array antenna lit up with a blinding flash, followed by a crackling plume of flame and debris. The radar was gone, vaporized. With the radar hub obliterated, the S-300PMU-2 battery went blind, its missiles useless without tracking data. Fire control screens in the Russian bunker flatlined, their green sweeps now empty. For all their technology, they were now as vulnerable as a tank without a turret. Panicked operators turned to the Panzersohn II for backup. One vehicle managed to launch a Salvo 257 E-6 missile streaked into the sky, arcing toward what they believed was the source of the attack. But the Kibani M-Pod was still doing its job, feeding the Panzer's radar a digital lie. The missiles veered wide, exploded harmlessly midair, blinded by false echoes and high-frequency interference. In less than 15 seconds, a multi-layered defense system valued at over $500 million had been gutted by 2 fighter jets built in the 1982nd and flown with 2025 cunning. The skies above Zolotarivka were no longer defended. They were open, and what came next wouldn't be a probing raid. It would be an execution. With the Nebo-M radar annihilated and the S-300 battery blinded, the corridor was open, and Ukraine wasted no time exploiting it. From 3,000 feet above the battlefield, a Su-24M fencer emerged from the low clouds, flying fast and steady on a programmed attack vector. Unlike the Su-27 second, this bird didn't sneak in low. It didn't have to. The path had already been cleared. Locked onto coordinates preloaded hours earlier, the Su-24's weapons officer released 2 Fab 500 general-purpose bombs, each retrofitted with UMPK, Universal Gliding, and Correction Module kits. These dumb iron bombs had been turned into precision-guided glide munitions, GPS-aided, steerable fins, extended range, no lasers, no pilot input, just physics, inertia, and cold programming. The bombs glided silently for nearly 30 seconds, adjusting their descent with robotic precision. At 4:29 a.m., both warheads impacted within 8 feet of their designated targets, one crashing into a 9M96 missile storage depot, the other obliterating a Tor M2 launcher tucked behind reinforced sand berms. Then came the chain reaction. Thermal sensors aboard orbiting Bayraktar drones recorded the inferno in near-infrared, a ripple of orange and white flashes erupting in sequence. High-pressure warheads cooked off, igniting propellant tanks and detonating missile tubes in a rapid-fire burst that lasted over 18 seconds. Flames soared past 650 feet, visible from over 12 miles away. For Russian operators still scrambling for answers, it wasn't just a strike, it was a signal from the sky. Their line had been breached, their weapons neutralized, and their fortress turned into a funeral pyre. What had once been the most defended zone in eastern Luhansk was now a smoking scar on the map. And Ukraine wasn't finished yet. By 4:32 a.m., the strike was over. But the aftermath had just begun. Within minutes, satellite uplinks and real-time drone feeds confirmed the extent of destruction. The Nebo-M radar array was completely annihilated, its site reduced to a crater and twisted metal. All 3 Russian launch platforms, 2 S, 3:00 p.m. U2 second, and 1 Tor M2 were either obliterated or consumed in secondary explosions. The 9M96 missile stored nearby had detonated in sequence, turning the launch site into a fire pit of shrapnel and scorched concrete. Total estimated loss: over $450 million in equipment alone, not including the classified systems and trained operators lost in the blasts. Russian response came, but not in time. At 4:34 a.m., two MiG-31BM interceptors were scrambled from a forward airstrip near Alchevsk. But by the time they reached the target zone at 4:39, the only thing left was heat distortion and drifting smoke columns visible from 20,000 feet. Still, Ukraine wasn't done. One of the MiG-29 that had played decoy minutes earlier was now orbiting at altitude, waiting with a heat-seeking R-73 air-to-air missile cued and armed. As the MiG-31BM approached, its radar still trying to acquire a target, the Ukrainian pilot squeezed the trigger. The R-73 hit the Russian jet near its starboard engine, igniting the fuel cell. In seconds, the MiG-31 spiraled, then disintegrated mid-air, no chute spotted. What began as a precision strike had now turned into a tactical air superiority message. Not only could Ukraine breach fortified skies, it could hold them. Russian command had underestimated the timing, the terrain, and the tenacity of a country that refused to fight on their terms. And for that, they paid in metal, fire, and silence. As the fire smoldered and Ukrainian strike teams reviewed post-strike imagery from orbiting Bayraktar and Spectre drones, something emerged from the ash that no one expected and everyone feared. Scattered among the wreckage were partially melted, reinforced alloy containers, not standard ammo crates or fuel drums, but specialized shielding units typically used for nuclear payload transport. Markings consistent with Russian strategic forces were visible under thermal magnification, some tagged with serial codes matching past IAEA watch lists. But that wasn't the most damning part. One drone's optical suite zoomed in on a singed circuit unit with a uniquely configured microcontroller identified by Ukrainian intelligence as a miniaturized arming module compatible with the Lancet MD, a known suicide drone modified for extended range and potential tactical nuclear use. Its distinct heatsink configuration and titanium casing had been cataloged in prior intercepted shipments traced to Iran. In short, Russia wasn't just stockpiling defensive weapons in Luhansk. It was preparing to field nuclear-capable UAVs, a red line most thought unthinkable. Within 3 hours, the images and metadata were compiled into a sealed brief and transmitted directly to IAEA headquarters in Vienna and NATO command in Brussels. Ukraine's foreign ministry issued a statement with surgical precision. "We struck a military target. What we found was a threat to global security." The response was swift and sobering. Allied intelligence agencies launched joint reviews. UN envoys demanded emergency sessions. The idea that Russia had deployed tactical nuclear drone components near active front lines shattered assumptions about escalation boundaries. What began as a localized airstrike had now shifted the legal and ethical battlefield. Ukraine hadn't just scored a military victory, it had exposed a strategic crime in progress. And suddenly, the world could no longer look away. In just under 20 minutes, Ukraine didn't just pierce Russia's air defenses, it rewrote the rules of modern air power. Two Su-27 older than their pilots, a single Su-24M bomber, and a handful of MiG-29 turned what should have been a suicide mission into a tactical masterstroke. Using nothing but terrain masking, electronic deception, and sheer pilot bravery, they dismantled a layered, billion-dollar Russian defense grid with surgical precision. But beyond the fireballs and dogfights, the real victory was one of clarity. The discovery of nuclear drone components didn't just legitimize Ukraine's strike, it framed it as a preemptive act of global stewardship. This wasn't about borders anymore. This was about the sky itself, about what kind of warfare the world would allow above our heads. And in that sky, Ukraine sent a message far louder than any official statement. You may have the bigger missiles. We have the better pilots, the better tactics, and the moral clarity to act before it's too late. What began as a precision raid had now escalated into a strategic turning point, with international legal ramifications and renewed NATO, and beyond. Nations that once wavered on sending aid suddenly found resolve. Analysts who mocked Ukraine's aging fleet now rewatch the footage in silence. The lesson wasn't in the hardware, it was in the humans behind it. When the smoke